Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting version of Chip Talks Health. So today we're going to talk about the endocannabinoid system. Oh boy, oh boy. Now, if most of you just immediately thought, gee, Chip's going to try to talk to us about marijuana, then I gotcha. That's exactly kind of what I wanted you to think, because we're going to try to do this without talking about marijuana at all. We may reference cannabis a little bit, and we're going to have to a little bit, but for the most part, we're going to talk about this system, how it applies to you right now, how it applies to the food that you eat, how you drive it, how you build it, how it can go wrong. So we're going to talk about all of those things today on Chip Talks Health. You guys ready? Are you excited? Here we go. And by the way, all of this stuff really has to do with understanding our function, right? Why aren't we taught this stuff in grade school? It's not, I mean, it can get very difficult and very complicated. It certainly can be extremely nuanced, but at the same time, the concepts, the logical concepts are, a third grader could understand most of these logical concepts. So I think we can handle it. I think we're capable of disseminating the information. So I just wonder why it isn't taught in the, just the failing of our education system all the way up to our university system. So what I'm going to teach you guys today, what I'm going to tell you guys and talk to you guys about today, no PhD knows this information unless they've gone out on their own and found it out. No doctor knows this information unless they've gone out on their own and found it out. No dietitian knows this information unless they've gone on their own and figured and found it out. Now, one of the nice things, hopefully you guys have all found Chat GPT. So, or things like it. So Grok is pretty good on X. There's several good, let's say, AI platforms. But I would encourage you to download one of those platforms and begin to ask it questions about what I tell you, what your doctor tells you, what researchers tell you, what anybody tells you. Because these AI tools now can really go out and they can crawl PubMed, they can crawl research, they can crawl, all types of information and pull that all together into a look that we've never really been able to have before. In the past, we've had to trust, PhD Bill or, Dr. Joe to kind of be the authority and expert. Well, not anymore. And honestly, thank God, because PhD Bill and Dr. Joe, they don't have the information. They don't have the information that I'm going to give you today. Okay. So pretty important that we have a whole re-emphasis on retraining our people, and certainly our professional class of people, with right information. Okay. Why would anybody teach them wrong information? Well, again, it's not necessarily wrong. It's just a box. It's just a little box. And if I know the big box, gosh, I can look like God in the, to the little box world, right? So I can dole out new discoveries and I can kind of help push people along in my system. So PhD Bill, he's a smart guy. Maybe I'll give him a little tidbit from the big box that he doesn't have in his little box yet, and he can go to town on that. So, again, maybe it works that way. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But all I know is this. No physician yet is taught about the endocannabinoid system at a PhD level. No researcher is taught about the endocannabinoid system at a PhD level yet. And that's insane. It's our master regulatory system. This system regulates our central nervous system. It's pretty important. If you're a neurologist, I think you would want to know about the endocannabinoid system. It regulates your whole world. So I think it's pretty important to know about, don't you? It's worth more than 2 hours of lecture in an overall 3-hour class on pharmacology, probably, given it's our master regulatory system. So let's talk about how this works. This is really cool. So literally, as we eat dietary fats, there are 4 types of dietary fats: saturated fat, which we all get from animal products or from an avocado; monounsaturated fat, which is olive oil. Oleic acid creates monounsaturated fat, or is monounsaturated fat. Again, avocado, or can come from animal product. Those two fats our bodies kind of make and deal with, and cholesterol is part of that whole system. And we kind of, back and forth and ping those guys around, and we can do all kinds of alterations with those two types of fats. But the two most important fats, and they are absolutely the two most important things that you eat every day, are omega-3 and omega-6 fats. Why are they important? Your body can't make them. Why are they important? You need them to build your entire immune system. They constitute what makes up cell walls. They are an integral part of your function, omega-3 and omega-6 fats, and they are the two most important fats for the endocannabinoid system. So literally, as we eat dietary fats, these dietary fats, as soon as they hit our intestinal lumen, begin to build endocannabinoids. And by virtue of building endocannabinoids, we send a signal through our vagal afferent nerve, to our hypothalamus hippocampus, and we set a nutritional state. Do we have enough? Are we getting enough omega-3 fat? Are we getting enough omega-6 fat? Are they balanced? Are we getting enough saturated and monounsaturated? If the answer to that is no, and it is for most of us right now, because none of us eat enough omega-3, then what happens is a decision has to be made to allow a gut biome to develop. All right. The purpose of the gut biome, it has several purposes, but it helps us definitely digest food. But the bacteria in the gut biome, and certainly, let's say, bacteria in the class of bacteroides, those guys produce very helpful short chain fatty acids that help us offset nutritional deficiencies. Okay. So how does this work? And I'll give you a real world situation. So saturated fat is inflammatory. Monounsaturated fat is anti-inflammatory. Omega-6 fat is inflammatory. Omega-3 fat is anti-inflammatory. Right now, we all overconsume saturated fat and omega-6 fat, which creates an incredibly inflammatory situation in our diet. So we're programming ourselves to be reactive and inflammatory. We have to have some way to mitigate inflammation. And if you're not eating omega-3s, you've got to have a way to mitigate inflammation. So your body has to have a makeup system. So that makeup system is in the biome, and the biome will then be asked to produce short chain fatty acids, which basically help offset inflammation. So we're in about the worst situation that we can possibly be in as to complexity right now, because we eat just kind of one side of the equation. We eat all the inflammatory stuff, and that creates a need for a very diverse and whopping gut biome, which is, where a lot of, let's say, disease starts and has its genesis and is allowed to rock and roll. So we really don't want that situation, do we, at all? And again, how do we begin to, help ourselves right now? Well, it's by understanding these fats and by understanding their consequences. So you're going to hear a lot of stuff about seed oils coming up soon. Are all seed oils bad? No. Chia seed oil is really good. Cranberry seed oil, black seed oils. There's a bunch of good seed oils. The problem with the oils that they're talking about when they talk about seed oils is those oils, like canola oil, safflower oil, things like that, all have way too much omega-6 in them. Corn oil in particular. Corn oil is 40-1. But corn oil contains a lot of omega-6. So the harm really, let's say when people talk about seed oils, what they're really talking about is oils that are way heavy in omega-6 fats, okay? Because not all seed oils, there's a bunch of really, really good seed oils, okay? So, but the ones with omega-6 fats that are heavy in omega-6 fats, we're over consuming right now. And again, that's setting a very inflammatory and reactionary state in our body, which is just a playground for disease, for pathogens and all manner of disease. But this is all endocannabinoid driven. Okay. So if we understand our endocannabinoid system and we understand that we need to eat equal amounts of omega-3 and omega-6 fats, then we're in a situation where we can begin to, let's say, better handle our environment, better handle our food sources. We're going to be more dynamic. We're not going to die of the inflammatory diseases that we die of right now. 80% of us will die of some inflammatory disease. That's how prevalent, this stuff is. And again, we don't need to, is what I'm telling you. And just by virtue of understanding this endocannabinoid system. So dietary fats are what are king to the endocannabinoid system. As soon as they hit our intestinal lumen, they immediately begin to build fats, begin to build endocannabinoids. And these endocannabinoids are what give us feedback and kind of allow us to manage, in a master regulatory way, our body. But again, we can set it in a certain way. So if we're over consuming omega-6s, we're going to set the overall management of our body in a very inflammatory and reactionary way. Equally, if we over consumed omega-3s over omega-6s, we would set a very healing and uninflammatory situation. So what would that look like? Well, if you got infected by something that was eating you, you might heal, right, you wouldn't have much of an immune response, but you might heal right behind, whatever that thing was eating, right? But we're not in that situation right now. We're in the exact opposite. So what happens now is we have very little healing power, and we have a lot of reactive and inflammatory power. And that's not good. That's not good for our health. That's what's leading to a lot of these diseases. There's a very important researcher named Dr. Artemis Simopoulos, and she has become let's say a colleague or a collaborator of mine, which is awesome. I'd love to talk to her. She is the lady that did all the underpinning research on omega-3 and omega-6 fats for, let's say, the Mediterranean diet, back in the 90s when all that was hot and heavy. That was her research that underpinned all this. But she has done the yeoman's work on omega-3, omega-6. And again, if you look at a paleo diet is based more on a, kind of 1-to-1 to 1-to-4 omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. And you don't get sick. You don't have autoimmunes. You don't get cancer. You don't have, most of the stuff that we see popping up in our population now as diseases if you're in those ratios. And again, she's, you can go back and look up that research, but her name is Dr. Artemis Simopoulos. So now we've understood kind of what the endocannabinoid system, how it works with our diet, and it absolutely is linked to our diet. But let's talk a little bit about, let's say, an inflammatory event and how that works with differences in omega-3, omega-6. And we won't go too deep into this stuff, but I just want you guys to have an appreciation for, the importance of the endocannabinoid system. And again, how your nerves fire, how your brain works, how we deal with our environment. All these things are endocannabinoid driven. Right now, the way we're configuring it is very reactive, though. And so what we have a tendency to do is, it's like fight or flight, right? So the first thing that you're going to do is react. You're going to react with cortisol. You're going to react with norepinephrine. You're going to react. You're going to react. You're going to react. And all these chemicals basically are produced so that we can make a good decision, run away if we need to, and be stronger than we normally would, right? So that's a fight or flight response. But all of us are kind of, let's say, in that fight or flight response as to any kind of infection, invasion, or anything. We're all just, boom, we're fight or flight. And that's because of the amount of omega-3, omega-6 we're eating. We're eating too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3. We could change that by eating equal amounts of omega-3, omega-6. We would then be less reactive and, kind of in a much better state, to be honest with you. But right now we're very reactive because of the amount of omega-6 that we eat. When we have that type of reaction, again, all kinds of things happen in our body, let's say, to produce that reaction that we're configuring by our endocannabinoid system and by our diet. So let me give you some examples of this. So most of us have taken, let's say, Tylenol or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, right? So we've taken some kind of Tylenol or ibuprofen. Well, the way that those drugs work is they will inhibit a system called COX. So you have two COX enzymes, if you will, COX-1 and COX-2, and NSAIDs will inhibit those systems. Usually in a not safe way. So we'll talk about how to do it safely in just a second, but they'll inhibit those systems. Now, why would that help you with pain? Okay. Well, if you're eating more omega-6s, you're producing more of a type of prostaglandin called PGE2. And PGE2 is kind of what, let's say, is the genesis of pain. It's also the genesis of inflammation. All right. And so if you're over consuming omega-6s, you're going to produce a lot more PGE2 and you're going to be a lot more, let's say, pain prone than somebody who's eating equal amounts of omega-3, omega-6. Are we talking about cannabis at all? It's kind of fun, isn't it? We're talking about omega-3 and omega-6 fats in your endocannabinoid system. We haven't really talked about cannabis at all. We'll talk about its effects on the system maybe at the end here. But omega-3 and omega-6 have a lot more impact on your daily endocannabinoid system than cannabis does, okay? And your dog's endocannabinoid system and your bird and your fish and anything with a spine's endocannabinoid system. All right, so basically in an overconsumption of omega-6s, we're going to produce more pain mediators. All right, so PGE2. So you're going to be more sensitive to pain. You're going to have a harder time mitigating pain. If we flip the situation, let's say we overconsumed omega-3s and underconsumed omega-6s, we would heal very fast. So there's another prostaglandin called PGE3 that's produced from omega-3 fats, and he's associated with healing. All right. So we would heal fast, but we wouldn't necessarily inflame or react. On COX inhibition. So are there safer ways to inhibit the COX system? Yes. And it turns out that, and again, this is why is marijuana important? Why is cannabis important? Well, it's almost the perfect screwdriver into this system. So if you know about medical marijuana, if you know about medical cannabis, and you know about its constituents and its pharmacology, then you can use that to safely impact the endocannabinoid system. So something like CBDA. So CBDA is in like a raw plant, cannabis plant leaf. And that CBDA will inhibit COX safely. Okay. So you have things in the cannabis plant that will very safely inhibit the COX enzyme system and do so a lot more safely than any non-steroidal anti-inflammatory device like a Tylenol or ibuprofen, which is cool beans, right? And in fact, if you go to nature and, once we really understand our workings, our function, and we understand, let's say, the big box rather than the little box that most doctors and researchers have been taught in, then what you quickly understand is that, God built us this kind of perfect form, and he also built us this perfect pharmacological system that's right out here in nature. And there's nothing that happens inside of you that we can't go to nature and, let's say, find a solution for or a fix for. There are certainly traumas. I mean, you could get shot or run over by something. And, again, that's, your body can heal, and there's things from nature that would help that. But I'm talking about like disease and, let's say, COX, inhibition. So there's always ways in nature to kind of go and find these similar things that we've gotten all wrapped around the axle about in the pharmacological world, in the medical world. So lots of good stuff always in nature. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, so the endocannabinoid system is super important. It's our master regulatory system. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you are a regulated thing, right? And how does that regulation work? Well, it certainly works at let's say a micro level, in cells, and that's explainable and easy to understand, but it also works at kind of a macro level, right? So good examples of this, and we kind of work with the sun, and we also work with the endocannabinoid system. If you want the science behind this, you can look at clock, and you can look at WNT, and how WNT is manipulated, let's say, by the endocannabinoid system, by CB1 receptors, and also by ion channels. So if you really want to dive deep, there's a lot to dive deep here. But let's just say the endocannabinoid system regulates organs and regulates organs to the point of, let's say, in our stomach, now is a good time to eat. In our liver, now is a time to repair. In our heart, now is a time to repair. And it turns out that you're working on your heart between about 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. every day. If you eat lunch, guess what happens? You don't work on your heart anymore. You work on your lunch. You start working on your liver about 7 o'clock at night. And so this is why people say, yeah, it's better, eat all your food before 7 o'clock, right? Because these things happen. And those are endocannabinoid system is involved in that, but that's kind of a bigger picture thing that how our bodies sync, let's say, with the sun and circadian rhythm. Inside of that, now, if you look at like your stomach and how the endocannabinoid system would regulate your stomach for now is a good time to eat. What happens every day and it's about 10 a.m. and about 3 p.m. is you'll begin to express CB1 neuroreceptors in the gut. And we kind of feel this. And this is what most of us think of as hunger. And it's really, you can go 40 days without eating, right? So it's you, but your body just twice a day normally goes through these processes where now would be a good time to eat. But that's all endocannabinoid. That's all endocannabinoid driven, endocannabinoid managed, all works through CB1 neuroreceptors. And in fact, one of the interesting things about the endocannabinoid system is that if it is the, master regulatory system, like many of us argue it is, then it would have to have the ability to control not just every cell, but organelles within cells. So the endocannabinoid system would absolutely have to control, let's say, mitochondria in energy status. How can it control and regulate energy status in you if it can't control and regulate energy status in a mitochondria? And so it turns out a recent development is they've found CB1 receptors on the outer membranes of mitochondria. So even these little organelles inside of cells have an endocannabinoid system expressed. Endoplasmic reticulums have CB1 neuroreceptors and would have to, because again, you're switching how you're folding proteins and that type thing. Even your perioxome has CB1 receptors. Why? Again, you beta oxidize there. And so it's important that your body is synced up, let's say, on whether you're burning fat or sugar and the energy statuses in your body. So every cell inside of every cell even responds to endocannabinoid signaling and endocannabinoid, let's say, mechanizations, which is really cool. So as you understand this system, again, it's a way to, you can do anything really with a cell through the endocannabinoid system. So let's talk a little bit about marijuana real quick, just at the end here. And we'll always, again, almost every talk, I talk about the endocannabinoid system. If I'm talking about the immune system, I'm going to be talking about how the endocannabinoid system interfaces with it. If I'm talking about autism, I'll be talking about the issues and problems that are seen in the endocannabinoid system. Autistic people have too little circulating endocannabinoids, which means that they don't have the engineering surface that you and I do. So it makes sense that they kind of are the way that they are. Obese people have too many circulating endocannabinoids, which means that they've lost communication. They've lost signaling. They've lost tone with their body. Easy things to fix, but you have to understand the body, the processes, and kind of where to go in nature to fix them. So let's talk about the master screwdriver for a second. So I speak and teach on the endocannabinoid system all the time. When I do, I have to spend about 5 minutes usually dialing people back from marijuana, because that's where everybody leaps to when we talk about the endocannabinoid system. So don't do that, first of all. And second of all, let me give you some information about kind of the differences. So the endocannabinoid system, your dog has, and a bird has, and your fish has, and your lizard has, and it's driven by dietary fats, okay? But cannabis, at least in humans and mammals, is a good way to get in the middle of that system like a master screwdriver. So as I mentioned, something like CBDA has action at COX enzymes and will help with pain relief, will help with inflammation control. THC, while that's the thing that everybody seems to get wrapped around the axle about psychoactivity, THCA in its acidic form, which is non-psychoactive, has all kinds of different properties. it mimics something called anandamide, which is our main control guy in the endocannabinoid system. So just giving you more control surface and more control, let's say, ways to manipulate that control surface is going to result in a better system, is going to result in a finer, more detailed way to better control your body, right? And so THC can and does augment anandamide and gives you more control. THC is psychoactive though, and that's very uncomfortable for a lot of people. We suggest THC really for people who have depression, who can't sleep, so it's got some good uses, but it's certainly not for everything. And there's no need to. There's so many things within the cannabis plant. So the cannabis plant will produce cannabinoids, which again directly impact the endocannabinoid system in broad ways and also in fine ways. The other thing that the cannabis plant produces that's really beneficial are terpenes. And terpenes are a way that a plant builds its immune system. So if a plant's trying to defend itself against staph or strep, it's going to build a certain terpene profile to do that. And it turns out that those terpene profiles, as long as they're safe, also do the same thing in us. Okay, so there are terpene profiles that will help fight pathogenic infections and all manner of things. But again, we're learning that from the cannabis plant. So in the future, I really don't know what's going to happen with cannabis policy, but we certainly need, let's say every one of us needs access to hemp or cannabis in some way. Whether you choose to, let's say, exercise that access or not is kind of up to you and your personal values. But it's just such a medicinal tool that, it's very beneficial, let's say, for us all to have access to it. All right, so that's a little bit about the endocannabinoid system. Again, with every single Chip Talks, we're going to be diving into the endocannabinoid system because I like to relate that to current science and to, let's say problems that we're talking about or problems that we're trying to solve, because it's our master regulatory system, and it's a great place to go to find answers, and it's a great place to understand how you work. So like if you're a physician or a researcher, let's say a professionally educated person, if I teach you about this system, it presents such a beautiful logical construct that diet just kind of falls out, that nutrition just kind of falls out, that behavior kind of falls out, environmental, damage that we all take on kind of falls out, allergies kind of fall out. So it's really easy to teach you about kind of how you work around this system. But, you can't compartmentalize information. You can't silo information. You can't, let's say, play all the games that have been done with education in our current situation, let's say. Anyway, we'll leave it there for now. So we'll see you guys back next week for another exciting version of Chip Talks Health, where we'll be talking about the endocannabinoid system, how you work, pathogens, your immune system, but best of all, how you can configure your body to be the best you can be. All right, we'll see you guys next week. Bye.